Hello friend, I figured I'd make a little video here to tell you about a couple functions on your camera that you might be able to have a little bit of fun with. Um, so yeah, enjoy and let me know what you think. Basically, there's three things that are going to play into your exposure to make sure that you get a good picture. The first one is going to be your aperture, or the size of the opening that's going to let light into the camera. This is going to affect your depth of field, blurred background, blurred foreground, and it's often called your f-stop. The second thing that's going to affect it is your ISO. This is the sensitivity of the sensor inside the camera itself. The more sensitive it is, the more light it picks up, but you also get more noise. Noise is little. Well, we'll talk about that later. Um, so you typically want to be lower in the ISO. The last thing is the shutter speed here, and this is going to affect things like motion blur, stop motion, different things like that. There's a lot of things that you can play with your shutter speed. So the first thing here, the aperture, or the depth of field, once again the opening through which the light's going to come into the camera. The smaller the number, the larger the opening, the larger the number, the smaller. It's kind of backwards. Don't think about that. Don't worry about that. All you basically need to know is the higher the number, the longer your depth of field is going to be. The lower the number, the shorter your depth of field is going to be. So if you want to really blur the background and foreground, you want to make sure you have a low number for your f-stop. If you want it all to be clear, you want a high number for your f-stop. So if you switch to your camera, you can go to your AV mode, which is aperture value. And you can use the little dial behind your shutter release button to set your aperture value. And you can see it'll go down to about 4.5. Depending on the lens you have, that will change. And it'll go up to about 20 or 29. As you look through the viewfinder, you can see it's the second number from the left, and it'll show pretty much the same. Your shutter speed, you can see, is adjusting to compensate so that you let enough light in. Now if you want to let extra or less light in, press the little AV button with your thumb while turning the dial. You can see the AV button has a little plus or minus there. Hold that down while turning the dial, and that way you can overexpose or underexpose. Other than that, it will adjust the shutter speed to whatever it needs to be to let enough light in to get a good picture. The next thing is your ISO. As we mentioned before, the higher your ISO is, the more noise you get. You can see a little bit of an example of what noise means. It's not going to be as pure of a color. It's going to be speckled. It's not going to look as good. It's going to look not blurry, but just bad. So typically you want to avoid your higher ISOs. I usually keep it on auto, unless I'm shooting at night, in which case I'll switch it to a specific ISO so it doesn't go too high. To change your ISO, you press the ISO button there and you turn your dial, and you can pick whatever ISO you want. Like I said, just keep it on auto most of the time unless you're shooting low light and you want to make sure it doesn't go too high. The last thing here is shutter speed. And your shutter speed is going to range anywhere from B, which stands for bulb, to about 4,000 or 5,000. On the left, starting there, we have 30 seconds, 25 seconds. Anything with its two little hash marks is going to mean seconds. You also have 1.6 seconds. 0 hash 3 is 0.3 seconds. Then it goes into 1/4, 1 over 500, 1 over 4,000. You get into the big numbers there. If you're looking through your viewfinder, it's just going to show up as 4, 500, or 4,000. Now what this is going to do is this is going to create for some cool special effects. If you have a slower shutter speed, you're going to get a lot more motion blur. This is those pictures of the streets where you see just the taillights or headlights and stuff like that, or water where you're just smoothing out the water. If you drop your shutter speed down to about 1 over 30 or 1 over 5, you can get a really smooth water picture of a fountain or something like that. If you want to freeze frame and catch every little drop of water, bump your shutter speed up to 500. Or anything higher than that, and you will catch every little drop. It'll freeze it all midair. There'll be no blur or anything like that. To do this, turn the little dial on the top of your camera to TV. This stands for time value. And then you can use your little rolly thing there to adjust whatever shutter speed you want. Once again, as you can see, your f-stop will adjust to compensate, just so you have enough light for the photo. Your ISO, if it's on auto, will also help compensate. And this way you can really just focus if you want to do motion blur, stop motion, or anything like that. If you see the F flashing like that, that means that you're moving out of range. You're not going to have enough light for the picture, or you're going to have too much light for the picture. In this case, it's not enough light, because you can see your ISO is completely maxed out. Once again, same thing. Once again, you can press your AV button, plus or minus button, to change the exposure if you want to underexpose or overexpose a picture. Underexposing makes the picture darker. Overexposing makes it kind of that heavenly bright, really bright kind of look to the picture. So basically, we've talked about three things here. We've talked about aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. These are things you want to keep in balance. On this little chart here, if one of them moves to the right, another has to move to the left to balance it. So that's what these TV and AV modes will do, is they'll adjust everything else, and so you can just sit and focus on either aperture or shutter speed, and they'll adjust the others to compensate to let enough light into the camera. You have another function here called M, or fully manual, in which case you will turn your dial to adjust the shutter speed, and then you can push the AV button there to adjust the f-stop. If your ISO is on auto, it will give a little bit of range for you to play with there, but you'll really want to be watching your light meter here. I'll push the shutter button so you can see that little bar under the 0. That's going to move as I'm underexposing or overexposing. So if I adjust my shutter speed too far, you can see I'm going to be underexposed or overexposing there. If I go the other way, well, my ISO is compensated right now, so you can't tell, but it will underexpose it. So basically, the three things that affect your exposure are the aperture, the ISO, or the sensitivity of the sensor, and the shutter speed. The two big ones, the aperture and shutter speed, are the things that are really fun to play with. AV gives you the chance to just focus on aperture and your depth of field if you want a short or long depth of field. TV gives you the option of just focusing on shutter speed if you want to do motion blur or really catch and stop some fast action there. But I hope you enjoyed this. Hope this helped a little bit and gave you some things to play with. I can't wait to see what you do with this, and yeah, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are and see where it takes you.